Hi, and welcome to Tips for Remote Learning. This is a video series in which we'll try to share a different tip every week, maybe that we have learned, that other students have learned, or that you have learned and shared with us, that we would like to pass along. These will be things, everything from how to best succeed in your classrooms to the impact of cultural differences on learning, especially learning in an online environment. In this first video, which is about power distance, we'll look at some of the cultural preferences that your American professors might have, and we hope that we'll be able to share some tips for succeeding best in the classroom. One of the main emphases and questions that students might have coming into the American University classroom includes, why ask questions? Sometimes your professors will expect you to ask questions. Other times they might, at the end of the lecture or even in the beginning, ask, what questions do you have, or any questions? And they truly want you to respond, and they do not feel that responding would make you feel or seem less intelligent or less knowledgeable. In fact, professors look on asking questions usually as a positive thing, in that you are tracking the information, you are processing the information that they're giving, and that the professor is able to use that to help them teach you and make sure that there are as few gaps as possible. In this quote from Eric Endlich from Top College Consultants in Boston, he says that students in American universities are often expected to speak up in class, share their opinions and viewpoints, and get to know their professors. In some classes, for example, participation is a grade, and so asking questions and answering the questions that other students ask might be for a grade. In other words, students who ask the teacher questions and answer the teacher's questions may receive points for that. Now, it depends on the syllabus and the professor, so it might not be this semester, but in future semesters you might see a participation grade, and that's usually based on asking questions. So the visible things that we see in the classroom are based on the cultural iceberg model. If you think of any culture, Indonesian culture, US culture, there are certain things that we can see, and those can be compared to the top of an iceberg that sticks out of the water. These things are like words, actions, gestures, what we prefer for eye contact or physical space, or who is close to us. But what we can see is all based on what's underneath the water of the iceberg. The part of the iceberg that is underneath the water is values, beliefs, religion, and what people think. And so understanding your American professor, it is helpful to know what is underneath the iceberg that is American culture. So these values, priorities, assumptions, and beliefs that are things that we can't see, but they are there in our heads, are what we see in the classroom. And so power distance is one of those things that is underneath the water. It's part of the iceberg that's underneath the water. Power distance is the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. So, in other words, power distance is the way that power is balanced in a group. We can think of power distance in this way societies that are equal, where wealth and the rich are relatively balanced, as low in power distance, and societies that are not as equal may be higher in power distance, as just an example. Look at this picture and think about which side of the picture is equal and which side is unequal. The left side, all four of the people are the same height, whereas on the right side, they are different heights, different sizes. The low power distance cultures generally prefer equal power, where everyone in a group has the same rights, privileges, duties, and responsibilities. And in high power distance cultures, there is unequal power, and it might mean that the leader has higher duties, higher responsibilities, and more rights. Now, neither of these is wrong or right. They are cultural values, and they depend on the culture and what the individuals in the culture prefer. So there is not a specific answer on cultural values, and especially power distance, that you have to conform to. But understanding what your professor is used to can help you to succeed in the class, because power distance impacts communication. Hofstede Insights is a cultural consultancy that provides data on cultural values across countries. So you can go to hofstedeinsights.com and find comparisons based on survey data that they have taken over the years. One of those values that they measure is power distance. In this example, they measured people on a scale of 0 to 100. Many people took the survey, and the result was an average score between 1 and 100. They were asked questions about things like, do you prefer power to be equal in a group or separate? Do you believe that in a family everyone should have the same decision-making power, or only the mother or only the father should make decisions? Do you believe that employees in a company should have a given say or given value to their voice, or only the boss or the company manager should make decisions? And so depending on how those answers were given, Hofstede Insights created a score. And so a score of 78 was given to Indonesia, which means high power distance, and a score of 40 was given to the United States, which means low power distance. People in the United States who took the survey scored a 40 on a scale of 1 to 100. This means that the US has a relatively low average preference on the scale compared to Indonesia, where a score of 78 was the average. This means that some people in the US prefer lower power distance than people in Indonesia. Now, there are a lot of limitations to this because each individual is different and does not necessarily fit the culture that they are assigned by Hofstede Insights. You can find people in the US who prefer a very high power distance and people in Indonesia who prefer a low power distance. Depends on your family, town, how you were raised, the school you have, and the friends you have. But in general, many people that you may meet in the United States prefer a low power distance. How does this work in the classroom? One student who came to the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, said that, "I think most professors are very courteous and willing to help international students adapt to the new learning environment." So having a low power distance for a professor might mean that they want to get to know their students on a personal level and really be an advocate and help them to succeed and adapt. Remember that power distance is a personal preference. So some US professors have low power distance, some have high power distance. Examples of high power distance might mean that the professor prefers to lecture, to have the students do reading, and to take notes. And so it's more of a one-way classroom. And examples of low power distance might mean that students would be assigned discussions, students would present PowerPoints, students might even teach parts of the class to other students. With low power distance, there tends to be more interaction and conversation in a classroom. More people are talking than just the professor. Now again, neither of these is necessarily right or wrong, but one benefit of a low power distance approach is that with language acquisition, repetition and practice and use is very important to the retention of language. So ask questions and be active in class as much as possible. There are 3 ways to that your professor might expect you to interact. And so one of those is to use your professor's office hours. Each week your professor has a 1-hour time set aside for office hours. It's not in a classroom, but just to get questions answered, to ask questions about the syllabus, or perhaps to just make a conversation or make a relationship with your professor. You can ask questions early and often. So for example, when is the Bible paper due? Is this a group assignment or an assignment that I should do alone? Or asking questions about just getting extra help. So can I have a vocabulary list for next lesson? Again, your professor will not look poorly on these questions. In fact, it's a very good thing to ask for whatever you need. Your professor may not know that you need help until you ask. So by asking, you can get help. Finally, the third way you can interact is by building a relationship with your professor. So get to know your professor. You might need a reference or recommendation letter when you're applying for an internship or a job. And so if you know the professor well, then they can provide a reference or a recommendation letter for you. So this has been Tips for Remote Learning #1, Power Distance, and we hope to continue uploading videos similar to this. And as you run into questions or perhaps how best to approach things, definitely send us questions to global@corbin.edu, and we might make a video